There we go.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay.
Now we're broadcasting. We're really good at technology.
Yes. We're trying to do this with a live studio audience today. Welcome to Talk Sex with Mojo and Dr. V. This is Mojo. You want to say something about yourself?
Oh, I was going to introduce Dr. V first.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I'm a counselor intern at the Center for Relationships, where Dr. V here is the executive director. And I work mostly with couples and individuals in counseling context for issues related to intimacy, sexuality, and trust recovery.
And Mojo, in a very short time, has become the director of our intimacy support program because that is something she's really fabulous at. And we hatched this idea of doing this talk show once a month. We do it the first Friday of the month from 6 to 7, 7:30, depending on how many people show up.
And how chatty we get.
Right? And we talk about different topics related to sex and intimacy and attachment and all kinds of fun
neuroscience.
Things. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So what do we want to talk about today, Mojo?
Well, we had started wanting to talk about complex trauma, and there's so many things to talk about there. I think I could speak to kind of just where I start in the counseling process when maybe like both partners show up and there's trauma, like kind of like my ideas on what seems to work best. And you could probably you've got that answer times a couple of more decades than me. So
I'm also going to, while you're doing that, I'm just going to put this link on our webpage, on our Facebook page. So anybody who would like to join us can join us here. And there it is.
Ah, yeah, there we go.
There we go. All right.
So what I'm starting to kind of do at the outset is really look at the level of distress in the relational system, and I kind of go one of two ways depending on that. If I have two people who just like want to stab each other, cannot talk without just like activating each other, I tend to start with models like Gottman, or something that feels more structured and creates that safe space so we can kind of like stabilize the relationship. And then I'll like pump in some EFT, interpersonal neurobiology, all that great stuff once they can have like a skill set to do that. So I'll start maybe a bit more like skills based, or that, if especially there's like lots of distress and you know they're feeling really not good about things. But you know, we like to work with a lot of couples who already feel like they're doing all right, you know? And in that case, I'm going to start more in, you know, maybe like emotionally focused work or things that go a little deeper, faster.
Right. We're talking about enhancement couples versus repair couples.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That's a word that we use. Enhancement couples may really have a foundation of goodwill and good feelings, still have a lot of attraction or attachment with each other. And then for them, starting out with intimacy can really start at a more nuanced level in terms of what their likes and dislikes are, what their sort of dreams or values around sex and intimacy and relationship are. So they're really saying, you know, how can we enhance? How can we really keep this intimacy and excitement going for a long time at a high energy level? And that's a very different conversation than couples who are coming in saying, we haven't had sex in 6 years. And
or she freaks out every time I touch her. She starts crying, or, you know, something that sounds more like in that trauma spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I also think, you know, this is sort of a little sidebar, but I promise I'll come back to this topic. But I think this is a really exciting time to be a mental health professional. And one of the reasons that it's really exciting is because we're seeing a lot of research from different streams, right? From different avenues of research, avenues of study that are all coming together and saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have neuroscience. Well, neuroscience research has been going on for years and years and years, decades. But in about the last decade and a half, we have this whole emerging field called interpersonal neurobiology, which basically says what happens when two nervous systems are trying to have a relationship or communication or trying to negotiate sex, right? And we have a lot of exciting research that tells us more about what's happening in people's brains and bodies.
Well, we didn't even talk about the vagus until like what?
Oh, that's even newer.
We didn't even start that until like, you know, a few years ago. So I think we're just now kind of like coming to that point in the exponential curve. I feel like where things are going to synthesize into like a really cool integrative model.
So when she says vagus, what she's talking about is the 10th cranial nerve that it turns out innervates or sends signals to the heart and the lungs and the gut and the intestines. And the part of the vagus nerve that sends signals to the bottom half of the body, so to speak, is handles more primitive signals, and the part that sends its signals to the heart and the lungs handles slightly more sophisticated. But the whole idea of the vagus nerve is how to get the body resting when there's no danger or energized for danger. And turns out this is a pretty important thing in sex and intimacy. The other avenue is attachment theory, and we're talking about years of research that went into looking at how children attach to their moms or primary caretakers, doesn't have to be mom, and what it took to have a secure relationship as you grew up with a parent. But then about 3-4 decades ago, probably in the early 90s, they began to do research on what they call adult attachment, which is basically looking at how we manage these close, intimate relationships as if they are attachment relationships. And that research is actually coinciding with the neuroscience research. And then there's the whole field of mindfulness.
I was just about to say, and it's all of a sudden magically lining up. Science is lining up with what these monks have been saying for centuries.
The other thing that's magically lining up is a lot of Eastern philosophical ideas around what is mental health and what's involved. And the most important idea there is that mental health is a mind-body-spirit issue. It's not just the mind. It's not just, you know, if you think good thoughts, you'll have good mental health. You actually have to have sort of a
and it's not about individuals either. We've treated that as the case for so long, but it's more about people in relational context. You know, that's all the research is pointing to connection as being a really important evolutionary drive and what really makes us happy and healthy and feel satisfied in life, like the degree to which we have those connections that feel secure.
Right.
You know, I say attachment sometimes and clients are like, what? Attached? I'm not attached, because there's like a bad word. So maybe we should clarify just attachment meaning like just feeling like you can like count on this person no matter what. Yeah, that closeness to another person. Attunement. As, you know.
And we've taken the word attachment and turned it into a whole theory, right? So we have this whole idea of what does it look like when you're in a secure attachment as an adult with another adult, which is different from what does it look like when you're securely attached to your mom or dad? Yeah. Do you want to say something about that? Because I want to turn my attention away for just a minute and see if I can get some people on Facebook talking about this and send out some more invites.
Yeah, sure.
To talk about secure attachment.
Yeah. So I find that a lot of people are kind of weirded out when I invite them to think about their parents, you know, to talk about attachment or the past. They're like, no, I'm having this very pressing issue right now. Why are you asking me to talk about my mom or my dad? This seems like some Freudian, you know what, like nonsense.
Right.
And so there's some pushback, and I sometimes have to pitch to clients how important it is that we go there and we look at attachment, because it really sets a foundation for how we develop through our lives and the style that we have in relation with other humans, like across our lifespan. And so the secure attachment looks like when you express a need for something, you know, in a baby, it'd be like crying, and mom comes and says, oh, baby, what do you need? Looks into the eye, you know, got eye gaze, and oh, she's checked and figures out it's a diaper change, fixes it. Baby is like, when I cried, mom came. I know I can count on this person. My needs will be met. It's wonderful. Same thing kind of, you know, as adults. But we do it in obviously more nuanced ways. And so a secure attachment looks like, you know, being able to say how you feel what you need, and have someone kind of attuned to that and resonate with you. Is it Sue Johnson who does the that acronym for describing attunement?
FACES?
Maybe.
That's Dan Siegel.
Oh, that's Dan Siegel. And it's flexible, adaptive,
coherent,
or curious, and energetic, and we're probably messing it up. The IPNB also have that list of like 9 C words. But it's when you can just kind of really be your most authentic self. You're kind of like in an integrated brain state and interacting with each other. Of course, parents aren't perfect, and so not everyone ends up with a secure attachment. You know, some people get a bit more anxious or avoidant or disorganized in their style. And so that happens, you know, just when we sort of have what Gottman calls bids for connection. You know, as adults, we do that as kids too. And so when we're making these bids as a kid, you know, there's lots of times when the parent may like turn away or against this bid or not notice. And so, you know, if that happens perpetually, we can come to learn like, oh, I need to like actually manage my own emotions. I need to regulate myself. And, you know, it can look a bit more avoidant in an attachment style. And where this becomes relevant is because so often I end up with couples where there's one person with an avoidant or a disorganized style and one with an anxious style. And our supervisor, Jenna, uses a great metaphor called the island and wave to describe this. And the island is kind of just like, I don't understand like how you need me to be regulated.
So I'm an island, you're an island, and we sort of communicate to each other across the space, right? And
then like an anxious style person would be the waves, like lapping at the island, and the island's like, yo, stop! Like, what do you need? Like, why can't you regulate yourself? And so, but the style really impacts us, you know, as we interact with people as adults. And so I think if people were courageous enough, because it's painful sometimes to look back at that stuff, but to really look at it and realize that a lot of the interactions and patterns that we're having in our relationships aren't really from the present moment, but they're from the past, and we're being triggered. If we can catch that and nip it in the bud, I see relationships blossom.
Well, and that's the trick, right? It's not at all uncommon for somebody with an anxious attachment style to marry or be with somebody, commit to somebody who has an avoidant or ambivalent attachment style. And so the very typical dance that develops between them is that the wave is constantly, you know, lapping at the island, because the wave is feeling like there isn't enough intimacy between us. You don't spend time with me. You don't tell me what's going on with you. I feel like I don't know you. And the island is saying,
yeah, leave me alone. Like, if you would just give me some space, I would like be able to be interested in this. Right. But we get that kind of distancer pursuer cycle, which brings so many couples in for intimacy counseling in particular.
And it turns into, I mean, again, the dance is not the problem. It's what do we make of the dance?
Exactly.
So it turns into a problem when the wave starts saying to the island, "You're so cold.
You never pay attention to me.
You never pay attention to me. You don't even care about me."
Yeah, exactly. You don't even notice me.
Right.
I'm over here experiencing feelings.
I could be bleeding on the floor.
Exactly.
And you might step over me to go get yourself a popsicle.
Yeah, and the island's thinking, you're so needy. Like, everything is about you. You know, we kind of see these styles also.
No matter what I do, it's not going to be enough.
Yeah, it's never enough. But you kind of see the two ends of the spectrum are like, am I doing it right? And like, am I enough? Yeah. And like that kind of like more islandy person is like, am I doing it right? Like this is how I'm supposed to be a good relator with other people. Am I doing it right? And then the wave, more anxious person is like, am I enough? Am I loved? Like, are you there for me? And those messages come from our early life.
So couples who are doing okay basically have figured out how to be there for each other, because the wave is not always feeling anxious.
Yeah.
There are things that make somebody who has that style feel more or less anxious. There are times when they feel really secure. Maybe they had a day off together and they spent the whole day together, not necessarily in deep, face-to-face intimacy, but just kind of hanging out with each other, and the person with the anxious style, the way, felt like they really got nourished by the attention and by the, somewhat personal, private conversations they had. And so then that wave is going to feel less of a need the next day to really lap at the island. So there might be more of a space.
We can teach them to kind of like plan when to like lap and when to not lap. Like maybe don't plan your lapping at like 5:45 when your partner's walking in the door and like sweating and has all their books.
Oh, my favorite time.
You know
what my favorite time was? 9:30 at night.
Yes, there you go. When like you're just like, oh, end of the day.
Of course,
that's the perfect time.
Well, because the kids were in bed and the kitchen was clean and I was done with all the chores of the day.
So like the only thing left unfinished is this, so we're gonna deal with it now.
And you never want to talk to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And my husband Tom at 9:30, he's turning into like, what's the word? He's basically starting to fall asleep, and he's like sitting in the chair nodding off. And he's like, what?
I'm trying to pay attention to you. I'm paying attention.
So he would say something like, "You're always so needy," and storm off. And then 2 minutes later, I'd hear him snoring.
Oh, that's going to be like, it's got to start again there.
Yes. So my favorite way of waking him up was to storm into the bedroom and turn all the lights on.
If I'm not sleeping, you're not sleeping. No way.
Of course, we didn't have great sex after that, for sure.
But it's such a common attachment dance. It's we're at our lowest resources. We're all pushing ourselves too hard, trying to juggle a million things. And at the end of the day, you want to come to your safe space and be noticed, be like appreciated, and just be able to be peaceful.
That's right. We should say we have a studio audience today. We have several people who are listening to us live. And maybe we should turn it on this camera, on this computer, and face one of them to them. What do you think?
Sure.
And invite them into this conversation. So I'm going to know.
You can just keep your head turned.
I'm going to join this.
Couch.
Well, what do y'all think so far? You can just.
But then we can't, we have to. It's like we have to look presentable then. Sometimes I have my eyes closed and it looks like I'm sleeping. But I'm not actually.
But I'm really listening.
You're talking about now or at 9:30?
Yeah, 9:30. Like 8:30.
Yeah, ideally.
You always do that.
I know.
That's it's funny that the word I hear it in session and just like, please don't say it to each other. We're making so much progress. And then they'll say, you always or you never. And I'm like, oh, here we go. You just asked for it. You just asked for it. It's so hard. Just don't use those. Those words are so sticky. They're like weaselly.
Why are those words so sticky?
Because it disregards the times when you're doing it right. Like, we're all doing so many things all the time. We can't be doing everything right all the time.
It's like saying you've already failed.
Yeah.
Why bother?
Yeah, so it's just like, great, okay, I've resigned myself now.
Right. Or this is a flaw in your character, so you're always going to be doing it.
Exactly. It's like putting that characterization like in your partner's body. I see couples make changes when they're able to put that outside and see it more as a contextual, historical, informed thing, not just like, because you're this, what I'm usually hearing is, you're a cheating bastard, you're always going to be a cheating bastard, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Oh my gosh, I've heard that so many times.
Oh my gosh, it's just like, we always hear that. See how meta that is?
Yeah. So do y'all have, our studio audience, do you have any questions or comments? Anything you want to know about this stuff?
We're putting you on the spot.
Of course.
I was wondering where the bathroom was, but
it's out and to the right.
I was gonna ask before this started, but then I forgot.
You always do that.
This could totally be the beginning of an argument.
Yeah.
You ever gotten in an argument?
This was all a setup.
That's right.
We had pre-planned this.
First
I was
studio
gonna-
argument.
Yeah, you and Debbie like
Yeah,
planned
it
this.
was a studio argument. That looked like it was real.
But if you actually need to, it's
Oh,
not the
yeah.
same.
Yeah.
It's in the back hallway.
But the questions, no, I don't have the questions yet. It's all very new.
Well,
Information.
I was wondering, we've been talking about secure attachment, and if somebody is unfortunately blessed with an insecure attachment, what kind of steps can they take on their own to try to take themselves towards a more secure attachment style?
I think that's a great question. So just to repeat the question in case our listening audience, of which there aren't many, had a question, and that's about, if you have an insecure attachment, which is, like more than 75% of people ending up in adulthood are likely to have an insecure attachment, right? Because there's so many things that could go wrong or not go perfectly in your childhood that could leave you with some insecurities. And so insecurity is very, very common. What do? We do have sort of a pathway to what we call earned security. So one is, having a secure attachment because everything went perfectly through your childhood. The other is you come into adulthood, you have insecurities, and then you earn security through the relationship that you have in adulthood. The relationships, because it's not just the primary relationship. I think culturally speaking, in America, we sort of put all our eggs in the basket of the one intimate partner or mom and dad. But in adulthood, right, we pick one person and say, you will meet all my needs.
Oh yeah, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational, hanging out. Yeah.
Exactly. And part of that package is you will know how to meet all my needs.
Yeah,
Without me asking for them.
You won't mess up either.
Yes, you won't mess up either. And so one of the things that helps us have more earned security is to really rely on our primary partners for not everything, or to rely on them for some things that they're really, really good at. And to recognize, of course, if I have an insecure attachment style, I'm more likely to be with somebody who has an insecure attachment style. So it's going to be harder for my partner to be perfect because I married an imperfect person, or I'm, with an imperfect person. So can I recognize that? And can I have a community of people that meet my needs? That increases the chances that as an adult, I can develop that sense of security. And a secure relationship is simply one where it feels okay to be me, where I feel confident that I am worthy of love and recognition and appreciation for just being me. I don't have to do anything. And that if there's conflict, we'll repair. Now, even after being married to my husband for 27 years, I don't actually know that 100% of the time. I do now more than often. I know if we have a conflict, we're going to repair. But there are times when we don't repair right away. So I have to have somebody else I can go to who really helps me process the conflict. If I can do that, I'm going to start to feel more confident, more calm, right? And I might actually have more compassion for my partner because I can give them their space and say, I'll come back when you're in a better place for us to talk this through. But if I don't have that community of support, then I'm really devastated that I need something and you're snoring in the other room,
Plus that reconnection space, I think, is like so fundamentally expansive for like each person, just like philosophically, and for the relationship too, because we're kind of always in this process of connecting and then disconnecting and then reconnecting, and then it kind of is just like constantly flowing. And so if we can just kind of like see that as more of like a normal thing, conflict is just kind of a normal thing. It's a disconnection. And so if we don't focus on that and we focus more on, okay, what happens after? How does the reconnecting happen? How does that like healing take place? That's going to do better work in terms of helping a relationship.
Well, John Gottman, one of the things he says is that in the midst or at the bottom of the worst conflict is the opportunity for the greatest closeness. Because when you have a really extreme emotional volatile conflict, often both people in the relationship are fighting for something that's very, very important to them. If they can really work through that, what they will discover is something that brings them close. And So every conflict is actually, every disconnection is an opportunity
To reconnect.
for greater connection.
Oh, I have a more pertinent question. Morgan's told me about trust building exercises, and these trust building exercises, well, this is just one example she gave me, where like if someone say they cheated or whatever, and then they're trying to build back trust from that, saying that the partner goes off and does something and they do what they said they were going to do, but like the example she gave me was like, I'm going to have lunch with so-and-so, and you trust them to go and do that, but you can't actually confirm that they've done what they say they're going to do. So I was just having a hard time understanding how you could like build trust.
So
like you had like inherent in that would be like trusting them to do that, and you're building trust based on your trust.
So you're saying, how can you build trust when you first have to trust they're telling you the truth about where they're going to go and who they're going to have lunch with?
Yeah.
And then you have to trust that
Right.
they actually carried through
Yes.
on what they told you.
And that they're reporting accurately.
Well, I mean, there are people I know who stalk their partners. So that's an option.
Well, and like the
not a good
digital,
option.
That doesn't seem like a good option either.
the
But
digital age has made it way easier, trust me.
I know.
Plenty of my clients who have been cheated on they're like professional sleuths. It's pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing,
Like,
yes.
and it's also
Well, it turns
doubly
out
devastating though.
There are cameras everywhere. I don't know if you know that. And most of the time you can tap into those cameras if you know how.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, or find my iPhone.
that's why Mark Zuckerberg tapes over his webcam and also tapes over his microphone on his laptop.
Yeah, they recommend everybody do that. So what's a healthier way to do that, right? A healthier way to do that would be to say to your partner, let's say my partner says, I'm going to go have lunch with my friend Jane. And I say, great, have fun with Jane and say hello to her. And then my partner comes back and I say, how was lunch with Jane? And my partner has something specific, right? They don't start like rolling their eyes and go, oh yeah, Jane, it was great. Oh, it was great.
Oh, Jane,
Yeah. Jane? Did I say Jane? I meant Jim. So we have ways, our radar for our partners can be really fine-tuned to the point where I know if I'm getting kind of a bypass on my question, or I know if I'm getting something that sounds substantive. Like I can tell this person actually had lunch with Jane because they're telling me something about Jane that matches my own map of Jane. And I say, where'd you have lunch? And they say Whole Foods. And I say, oh, what'd you have? And they're telling me they had, something that I know Whole Foods serves. Mm-hmm. Then I'm beginning to increase my trust because their story is credible and it's more coherent. Then I don't actually have to go to Stockholm, right?
Right.
And it's also not just one incident, right? So if somebody has betrayed their partner and they're trying to rebuild the trust, you really have to have 200, 300 incidents of telling the truth and your partner feeling like, yeah, everything matched up before their nervous system is going to really let go.
We start really small, like in a counseling room where, they can reveal truths and, that kind of starts the process of, hey, we're doing this in an honest way, and they kind of know what's at stake. And what I tell my clients who just can't let go is like, they could still be having this relationship, they could not, but, treating it as though it's happening, it's going to make it like more statistically probable that it's going to, and, there's so many,
And I think this is where knowing your partner's attachment style can be very helpful. Mm-hmm. So if your partner's a wave, then that person builds trust through closeness and intimate self-disclosure. Mm-hmm. So that person is going to feel a lot more trusting if their partner comes back to them and says things like, Jane and I talked about this, and then I thought this, but I didn't tell her, but I'm telling you, right? Or as I was sitting with Jane, she reminded me of you because here's some things that came up. That feels like intimate self-disclosure. Waves need that.
Yeah.
Islands, on the other hand, need to be allowed to feel autonomous, need to feel like it's okay for them to choose how much they share, that there's a kind of inherent trust in whatever you tell me is okay. And I don't have to interrogate you, right? Islands feel better when they don't feel pressure to meet certain standards. So knowing your partner's attachment style also makes a big difference in how you're able to build trust with
and their brain state. Because I think even if we're secure in our attachment, or we're like pretty regulated, if we're clicked out into a limbic state or a reptilian lower brain state, we're not going to be able to connect in the best possible way.
Talk about that a little, because you have some very interesting ideas on that.
Well, so the reading that I would recommend would be either Dan Siegel or Stephen Porges. So it's like polyvagal theory and interpersonal neurobiology. But basically, if you've ever seen the hand-brain model, like really quickly, this is Daniel Siegel's model, but there's 3 parts of the brain. If you kind of like open it up, and we have kind of like downstairs, lower lizard brain is kind of like our oldest kind of evolutionary heritage. Then we have a middle part of the brain called the limbic, and that's more kind of emotional space. The language of that brain is sensation, feeling. Our amygdala is in there, and our hippocampus, that's what our little thumbsy is going to represent, is wrapped in there. And then our frontal lobes kind of wrap over that. And so, and your brain literally sits about like this. Your optic nerve would pop out right here. And so the language Dan Siegel uses is flipping your lid, or basically when we get aroused, and I don't mean like turned on, but just like our nervous systems get activated to a point, like if your heart's going over 120 beats per minute, something like that, then our body basically is like determining what resources to use or not use. So if it's not life, if it's not going to absolutely keep you alive, it's going to cut it off. And so the hippocampus will get clicked off. And so that's our kind of memory, emotional processing part of the brain. And so that's why, like, after an argument, it might go on for 10 minutes. You might not even know how long it was or even what you were fighting about, or it becomes fuzzy in your memory. It's because you might have gotten so activated that your hippocampus actually clicked off, because it's like, don't need to use energy on this. I need to use energy to mobilize into a fight-flight situation. Because unfortunately, just the way we evolved, your partner screaming at you, your nervous system is going to feel that kind of the same way, like a saber-toothed tiger lunging at you, and especially the more activated you get, we kind of just fall back into our earliest, evolutionary wiring, which is that kind of like pull the plug, freeze, collapse response. And so what I find really useful for counselors and people that are clients is just, and this is Jules Taylor Shore's language, but speaking the language of the brain state that you're interacting with. And so teaching couples to recognize when they're in you can even call it red, yellow, green, or like low brain state, mid, and then green, or neuroceptive safety. That's like when we want to be talking or trying to connect. But if we're not there, that's where our real language is. If your partner looks like more anxious, fight, flighty, they're maybe more in a midbrain state, that language is sensation and feeling. So you can really just reflect back, how you feeling, what do you need right now, and just sit with it. And then if they're if you've just thrown a pot into the wall and you're raging out, the veins are popping, it's going to take you about 20 minutes to come down from that. That's not a language space. So you can really only just be there with your partner and be supportive. And counselors can use that too. If you see your client not in neuroceptive safety, don't be doing existential work. It's kind of how we're saying, if the clients come in and they're not super distressed, we can do that. But if there's distress or there's crazy nervous system imbalance, we don't want to go there until we know that we can have everybody kind of in the green, or hey, before we talk, let's check in. Are we both in the green? Let's not have a conversation about something really heated unless we're both in neuroceptive safety.
So one trick that might also be really, really useful, and think about that, I really like that idea that you change up the way you communicate based on your partner and your own brain state. One of my professors in doctoral school talked about this progression that children go through where it's action, fantasy, language.
Oh, yeah.
So when they're very, very young, younger than 3 years old, they only know how to tell you their feelings in action. And we can regress to that. We don't literally become like 3-year-olds, but our brains, when they're in that movie, we can. It's not helpful to tell your partner they're acting like a 3-year-old, even if they are. But when we go to the action state, the only thing that makes sense in that state is actions, right? Actions like hugging, actions like rubbing somebody's arm, or actions like, I'm going to give you some space, or I'm just going to sit here with you. So in that state, when veins are popping, they've just thrown something on the ground and they're just screaming, you don't really want to try to help that person see how irrational their behavior is.
Try telling someone to calm down. Calm down.
Exactly.
Just calm down. Like, yeah, good luck. Good luck.
Let me show you calm.
Yeah, I'll show you it. Yeah, and then there goes the second pot.
Right. Is there something about pots and walls that I should know about, Mojo?
I can't tell you how many of my clients, it's like fights are over IKEA and things that get thrown are like pots. It's like these vases are IKEA things. They just like smash ceramically really well.
Convenient handles.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And they make a big sound, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a volatile, passionate style person, so that doesn't resonate for me. But I can imagine it having a good feel.
Right.
But it's people not realizing that energy has to get discharged out of their nervous system. Yes. And because we're a culture where we're like, let's stuff all of our feelings and just keep it in, we don't get to discharge that trauma. Or even little kids like, sit still, stop moving. That they are doing things because their body's being innervated. So
when somebody is storming around and throwing things, or screaming and yelling and flailing their arms, they're in that action state. You want to meet them in the action state, but with calming behaviors, right? Hugging, giving them a back rub, or bringing them a cup of coffee or something, and saying, let's just take a break. Let's just figure out what needs to happen here, and helping them calm down. If they're in a limbic state where they're feeling more, how you know that your partner's in a limbic state is that they're activated, their voice has gone up, and what they're saying sounds a little paranoid. It sounds suspicious, it sounds untrusting, but they're kind of wanting answers, like, tell me.
Or judgy.
Or they're being judgy, exactly. They seem to have an agenda, and they seem judgmental. I remember that was one thing. What you want to do there is go to fantasy. To go to fantasy, you go to texting, you go to emailing. You can also just say, let's just watch a television show for 30 minutes and then come back to talking. And what happens is a lot of our emotions get projected onto the television show, right? But emailing, writing to people, or just saying, let's take a walk. Right? And let's go out in nature. Sometimes that kind of captures that fantasy place, which in therapy, what I would do if I felt like people couldn't get out of that judgy place is get them to start drawing together and get them to start playing together.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I love to do is water play, and I might just get a little bucket or a little, I love these bus trays.
Oh yeah.
You
just like have one in the council.
I have one at home. It's not here right now, but yeah, I'll bring it out and I'll put some water in it and I'll throw a bunch of toys in there. And in the beginning, their toys are smashing into each other, right? But very quickly, the water as well as the little toys allow people to go into that fantasy space. And then they're discharging the energy, they're discharging their feelings. They're communicating with each other, but they're really communicating in a as-if space. Language is where somebody's able to listen. They're able to find commonalities with you. So they're listening to you as if you have qualities that they own, or they're listening to you as if some of their positive qualities are in you. and they're able to listen as if you're a reasonable person making a reasonable point of view. And they're able to validate, which means they're able to say to you, that really makes sense, I can relate to that, or yeah, you're right, I saw that too. That's when language.
And it's that last piece that is so not there when there's high distress, you know, just being able to hear from your partner, oh, I see how a normal, rational, sane human would do what you did in that context. That makes sense to me. When we can get them kind of moving there, that's where I see that kind of distress start to dissipate.
Well, and I think it's because it makes the partner feel like I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
You know, even though I'm kind of ashamed of my behavior, I shouldn't have thrown that pot. There's a reason why I got there. And now this other person sees it and is saying, I get it. I get why you got that upset.
Yeah. And it's not going to be a condition that keeps love or connection from coming to you. Because that's what
they're not withholding, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, or just that you know, positive regard that doesn't have any conditions that, you know, Rogers found, you know, so integral to the therapeutic relationship. Just trying for that, or just realizing how much that really impacts our development, like the extent to which we feel that from other humans.
Yeah.
And my clients with lots of trauma, it's usually that was disrupted really severely.
And you know, we were talking the other day about simple trauma and complex trauma. So simple trauma is, I was going along, I was really doing fine, I was very functional, I grew up in a fairly healthy environment, and then something bad happens to me, like 9/11, or a rape experience, or a natural disaster. I'm going to have some impact from that, right? I'm going to have symptoms, I might have difficulty sleeping, I might be crying a lot, I might avoid the places that remind me of what happened to me, but it's going to fade over time. With a little bit of support, it can fade faster. And certainly most people move back to that resilience. And it doesn't really change the person in their personality. Whereas complex trauma is trauma where people felt trapped in a situation that was traumatic, and it happened over and over and over again. Really changes their personality. It changes how they do relationship. It changes how their attention. This is something that was pretty impressive. I was reading that article about it. They were talking about how our brain adapts. You know, our brain never stops changing and growing. And so our brain adapts to complex trauma by changing the way we manage attention and focus. One of the ways it does that is it makes us look more scatterbrained. It makes us look like ADD. But really that's because the brain has split off different compartments to pay attention to different things. Right? If you're not a trauma survivor, then your brain can really ignore a lot of stimuli. Most of the time, your conscious brain is only getting the headlines. And that's all it needs. It's not getting the whole newspaper, okay? And it uses the headlines to figure out what it's going to do. But someone who's been through complex trauma, it's like they're getting the headlines, and right along with that, words and phrases from some of the stories are intruding. And their brain has to decide what to do with that detailed information that's coming in. And over time, it adapts by learning how to pay attention to some of the details. Or, for example, I had somebody who went through complex trauma tell me that they cannot listen to what somebody is saying because their brain is constantly trying to make sense of what they're wearing. Like, you know, oh, that's a black jersey. I wonder where she got it from. That's the kind of thing I've seen at Macy's. And she says it's really annoying, and she knows it's irrelevant. Who cares where that blouse came from? But her brain over time has learned that that's very, very important. At one time, it was very important to figuring out whether somebody was safe.
Safe or not, yeah.
Right. I sort of launched off into a long discussion about this. What do you think?
I think it's really important because also I see the intersection at like attachment and trauma in clients who most of the kind of psychological community would call borderline or borderline personality disorder. Yes. But when you look at the research of people who present with that, it's mostly people who have experienced pervasive what Bessel van der Kolk would call developmental trauma, or just like repeated, boundary violations with their family, or being assaulted or coerced or violence, if that was happening repeatedly, that's where we see like those kind of symptoms and the more complex stuff to untangle.
And unfortunately, people who've experienced that early developmental complex trauma then make choices in life that bring more trauma. And so there's a part of them that can understand, oh, my, parents were violent, abusive. I had this experience in middle school. And if that's all it was, they could get over it. But really what's happened is since then, they've been in horrible relationships that have been abusive, or they've played out some drama with their parents that is still ongoing. And there's some sort of financial problem that they're having to go back to their parent. So they're repeating that feeling of I'm trapped in a helpless situation that's traumatizing and I have to keep going back. And that's what makes that whole personality change look very irrational and volatile and unpredictable.
And I love I think it's also Bessel who used this definition, but trauma being overwhelm of the nervous system in perceived isolation. So it's not just like, oh, are you alone, really, but like if you feel like there's nowhere to go. And with being a kid, our nervous systems literally direct us towards our parents or our caregivers when we're in danger. It's like, okay, that's what we should do. But then if that's also the person that's hurting you, it puts you in a double bind. And that's where we see trauma symptoms like, the like lower part of that kind of like unplugging dissociative stuff, and even dissociative identity disorder, if there's so many experiences over time that a personality has space to develop kind of in that clicked out body.
Right. And it actually, dissociative identity disorder is what we used to call multiple personalities. And it makes a lot of sense if you understand the nervous system and how it tries to adapt and develop a coping strategy for that experience of the double bind, or feeling isolated, or feeling like there's all these multiple layers of secrets and abuse, and so they have to develop different ways of being in different contexts. It makes sense that over time the nervous system begins to create these separate personalities that come out in different contexts. Yeah,
when you get certain cues and triggers, it's like, okay, I'm going to take over. It's a protective thing.
Yeah. Which
I think a lot of people just, it's hard to see our symptoms sometimes as like protective or a good thing, like pain, that sucks, I don't want pain or anxiety. But if we look at it more as a message from our body, like anxiety can be super beneficial, especially when we were evolving and there were like actually dinosaurs like plucking us up off the ground, It kept us alive. And so instead of trying to just like stuff it and not pay attention to it, turn towards it and see like, okay, what is triggering me to feel this way right now? Is there something that my body's needing from me, or like,
This is where polyvagal theory is very useful, because it really helps you understand the difference between, if the dinosaur looks like it's coming to get you, you want to be able to run, climb a tree, you want to be able to find somebody else that can maybe shoot arrows at the dinosaur and get rid of it. But if the dinosaur has already plucked you off the ground, then what you want to be able to do is collapse, so you don't feel
you want
the dinosaur eating through your skeleton. Yes,
exactly. And that's like when we were just kind of little floating creatures in the ocean at first, like boneless kind of critters. That was the only response that we needed, was if we were gonna get chomped or smashed or eaten.
That's right.
We needed to
not feel our life was pretty simple. Exist or not.
Float around, and if we're gonna be not floating, we should make it not feel that painful if that happens. So
to be or not to be. That's the only question.
And unfortunately, that was like when we because of the way that these circuits are kind of wired in, we revert to that oldest one kind of the fastest.
Right. Yeah. Or when it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
What Stephen Porges talks about is when there's a threat to the organism, the brain really basically says, why bother analyzing the situation?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna like make sure that I numb out and collapse or faint, which is why sometimes people who are facing extreme trauma will lose consciousness.
Yeah. That's fainting is literally the body like saying, okay, I've evaluated the system, like everything that's going on. You have 100% chance of dying. I'm gonna go ahead and have you not feel that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So what are we doing on time here, Mojo?
Oh, it's 7.
It's 7. Do we want to see if our studio audience has any last
questions?
words before we
Any last words or important questions?
go for it? Never mind.
Well, I don't know if dinosaurs and people existed at the same time.
Oh no, that was. Thank you for that, because that's true. Dinosaur and people did not exist the same.
We're talking more like saber-tooth or woolly
We were
mammoth.
just using dinosaurs as a metaphor, but we should be scientifically accurate.
No, we should. We should really
say,
keep that rigorous.
Yes,
standard.
we should. What was that big elephant-looking thing that existed at the
Woolly
same time?
mammoth.
The woolly mammoth.
Yeah.
So we'll say
Woolly mammoth is charging across.
Yes.
But that's also where we evolved that
Or
need
mountain lion.
That's where we evolved that need for connection, because if woolly mammoth is like charging at you, if you've got a whole bunch of other caveman dudes,
That's
you know,
right.
you're good. Or if you're hunter-gathering, being a cave lady or cave woman, you know, and you had a lookout with you or someone else, then you'll be able to see if the saber-tooth is like going to get you. So we just deeply know in our most basic biological programming that
And
we
you know,
need
honestly, I think sometimes I get a little bit upset about going to these very primitive examples, right?
Oh yeah, well the psychobiologists and the evolutionary guys,
because
they justify rape and all kinds of wacky stuff.
And they also treat us like we are our biologies.
Mm-hmm.
And then they create these very extreme gender differences. And I think we have continued to evolve since the time of the caveman. And one of the ways that we've evolved is that we really don't need those kinds of dramatic biological differences between men and women. So I can see in the Neanderthal that men had certain physiques and maybe certain personalities because they had to. And the ones who didn't, actually, believe it or not, there's some evidence that ancient cultures had a space for people who didn't fit the gender paradigm.
Yeah.
They had certain roles and they got to do certain things. And so they figured that out. But really the majority, right, the general population was divided very cleanly between men and women because they often had different roles. I don't think we need that anymore. No. And so we've really evolved to not have those dramatic differences. And so it's a little bit regressive to talk, you know, in terms of
they're more same than different, and I hear that misunderstanding coming into the counseling room again and again and again. To say it simply, women like to have sex and men have feelings, and we find that men are even possibly less emotionally resilient than females. You know, so all of this stuff, you know, I love how you talk about just like there's research that shows that men are more visual in their kind of fantasy or porn tastes and things, and women are less, but it could be totally cultural, and no one even talks about that.
It is often cultural, right? Often men are introduced to sex through magazines and porn, and who's introducing them? Well, other men. Other men are saying to them, hey, look at this, you know? Women are not getting other women going, hey, look at this. If they did, they would also have visual cues that led to that. Women are often getting, you know, how did you feel?
Yeah, what was it like? Ooh, don't talk about it.
Right. So, you know, we train ourselves to be more expert at the thing that we've experienced over and over again. Yeah. So since it's 7 o'clock, you think we should
go ahead and
end our
broadcast?
Yeah.
Thank you, live studio audience, for joining us. That was great.
It was great.
Yeah. It's more fun when there's people here.
And we should find a way to involve them more, I think. We should have more of a conversation.
Or a little piece of paper where they can write questions and just like send it. Like
we did try. We tried to have people on the computer sending us questions. But
there was some feedback.
Yeah.
Like between the computers.
Yeah, there was. I heard that.
It was like All right.
Well, thank you once again for this fun talk. And maybe we should say in 2 weeks, We're both going to be in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
At the Creating Connections Conference.
So we get to like go and meet these like
We
Dan Siegel's gonna
are.
be there. I'm gonna
And guess
nerd out.
what?
I'm gonna
Guess
fangirl
what?
so
I just
hard.
talked to the organizers today, and they're going to set up appointments for you and I to go do live broadcasts with each of the presenters. So we're going to
Stop it.
We're gonna have a
Steve
social
Johnson.
media.
Oh my gosh.
Social media lounge.
I'm gonna actually collapse and my little nerdy heart is just gonna explode.
So you and I are going to be doing this talk on either Google. I suggested Google Hangouts so that we can set it up on YouTube and do it that way. And so we're going to be doing that from Washington, D.C., September 22nd, 23rd, 24th. And we're going to be meeting with Sue Johnson and Jim Cohn and Dan Siegel and Louis Cozolino and Sydney Paver, a whole bunch of people. So it's going to be fun.
Oh my gosh, it's gonna be way too much fun.
It is going to be fun. All right, stay tuned. We're going to have a special edition of Talk Sex with Mojo and Dr. V in 2 weeks. And then after that, we'll be back at this station when?
Yeah, first Friday every month.
Friday of October.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see you then. Bye.